recorded. It's a real pleasure. I get the most fun job today, and that's I get to introduce our keynote speaker. I got a chance to meet Curt Carlson last week, and the one thing he told me was keep the intro short. I want to remain your friend, Curt. So as such, I'll do that. It's a little bit tough. I'd argue that Curt has been involved with education all his life, whether as a student, a teacher, a professor, or as an innovator. Perhaps a pinnacle of innovation for Curt was when he was CEO of SRI, what was formerly known as the Stanford Research Institute from 1998 to 2014. SRI has become a global model for its creation of high-value innovations in the tens of billions of dollars, such as high-definition TV. If you look over his shoulder, you will see an Emmy. I will let you ask him what he won the second one for. It's also Intuitive Surgical, which is the company that developed the Da Vinci robotic surgery system, and that company is doing amazing things today, as well as Siri on your phone. He served on President Obama's National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and was also on the Air Force Science Board. He is also founding fellow, for those around Tampa and USF know about this, and nationwide, the National Academy of Inventors. He's a Tau Beta Pi physics graduate from WPI, Massachusetts, master's and PhD degrees from Rutgers, and currently, Curt is channeling all his knowledge and passion for innovation and value creation. And he's helping join it with our educational system in a framework called active learning. Like I said, I got a chance to talk with Curt last week. He's incredibly passionate about this mission. He wants to hear from you today, so ask questions. We've already got them lined up, Curt, so the questions are there.
Good.
Please ask. And I've also found him to be a really nice guy. Curt, over to you to share some thoughts, and then I'll jump back in with the fireside piece.
Okay.
All yours, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you, Paul. And it's great to be here with everybody talking about one of the most important issues in America today, which is not only how we educate K through 12 kids, but how do we help people learn throughout their entire career? And when I started out, I want to start with a little metaphor that's going to run through this talk. I started out as a professional musician at 15, if you can believe it, in the Rhode Island Philharmonic. And music, for me, was a defining experience where you work in small teams, you all share the passion, you work, each one of you has a special role to play. You work like crazy, and if you pull it all together and everybody does what you hope, it's like magic. It's like magic. Now, some of you have experienced that different ways, with different kinds of music. I played classical music, but obviously it applies to all kinds of music, or to sports, or to other things you do. I decided to go into science, as Paul just said, and got my PhD, and then went to RCA. And I had a really good career there. My last project there was to build what would have been the first internet company in the world with Citicorp and 9X. So, I had all the trappings of success in a big company. Then one day, GE bought RCA, and that was the end of that project. We were in GE for a while, and then one day my good friend Norm Winarski came in and said, Curt, we've been sold to SRI International in Silicon Valley. And I asked him if he thought that was a good idea, and he said, the technical guys think it's a really great idea. So I said, well, Norman, that may be true, but until 5 minutes ago, they gave us millions of dollars to spend. And now I think they expect us to earn millions of dollars. And I suspect that's going to be different, because what they do at SRI, developing and selling products and services to people around the world, is not exactly what we do here in a research lab for RCA. And then Norman said the magic words that changed both of our lives in a positive way forever. And it's made everything I've done possible. And that is, he said, all we need to do is learn. It's like everything else we've ever done, we have to learn. Now, Norman is a very, very smart person. So, when your best buddy, who's a really smart person, says that, that helps a lot. But I was trying to think, what could we do Now, I don't know if you studied serious music. One of the ways, you have a teacher and you get coached individually, that sort of thing. But there's another way you learn. You learn in groups. There'll be 5 or 6 students there, and they bring in their instruments and their piece, and they perform a little tiny piece of it. They don't play the easy parts. They play the hard bits. You play the hard bits, and then the teacher gives you tips about how to solve the problems you have with that. And you all take turns. So you learn not only your piece, but you learn from these solutions to all these others, and the students talk to each other and give feedback. So there's this kind of group, it's called a master class. And that was one of the most powerful experiences I had as a young kid. So when Norman came in, I said, why don't we form a master class? So what we did was we got together every other Monday night from 5 until 9 over pizza and Coke. And we all stood up and we presented the hard bits, not the things we knew, the hard bits that we were struggling with to adapt to our new job. Of course, we didn't have a master teacher in the room because none of us actually knew how to do this. So we read every book and talked to people. And it turned out nothing that we read worked, actually. Some success story from a CEO wasn't what we were doing, and the complicated systems don't work, and that's usually what you find. So we had to kind of invent our way. So what's an example of that? Well, in music, notes and scales, and there's a language that goes along with that, portamento and allegro, and there's a whole language that means you can work together very efficiently and effectively. We didn't have that. By the way, most companies still don't have that. So we had to kind of invent these things as we were going along, and we discovered some principles that really made a difference. Anyway, for about 18 months, we had absolutely zero success. Here I was a big company guy, and everybody wanted to talk to me, and now all of a sudden I'm Curt, and nobody wants to talk to me. And the truth is, I have nothing to offer. I don't know how to do this. I have no idea how to do this. And that was a bit of a shock. But bit by bit, we learned and we started to succeed. And then we started to succeed really fast. And basically, that part of SRI, which was in Princeton, we were basically taking it over because we were just absorbing the parts that were in trouble and brought them into our master class, so to speak, and gave them the skills they needed to thrive. So at that point, they promoted me to run the whole companies in Silicon Valley, where I am now. And SRI is a famous place out here. It received the first internet transmission, invented the personal computer interface, including the mouse, all kinds of things, actually, lots of wonderful things. But for 20 years, it actually had been in decline because its business model was obsolete. Now, when you've been in decline for 20 years, all kinds of bad things happen. The first was it almost was about to go bankrupt. The second is they were selling off the land, the buildings were falling down, and the really bad problem was when you're failing for 20 years, the people inside the organizations get kind of grouchy, and they start blaming each other for the failure. So it was not a happy place at all. Just to give you one clue about that is my first all hands with the managers, the offsite with the managers. 2 days before, I had actually come back on a red eye and I'd fallen down and I'd badly broken up. I destroyed my shoulder. So I'm on heavy doses of Vicodin and I stand up there and welcome myself. I'm glad to be here. And the first manager stood up and said, Curt, you seem to think we're going to grow. We're not going to grow. We can't grow. We don't want to grow. You can forget that. And that was kind of the highlight of the event. It was all downhill after that. And that's what it's like when people have been failing for 20 years. It was like an orchestra, if I want to use my musical metaphor again. It was like an orchestra, but the piccolos hated the clarinets and the basses hated the violinists. They were making noise, but it was not a pleasant noise. But I had this mental model of working in small teams, like again in music, and I was convinced that if we could get the teams and start to find those teams and start forming those teams across the school, the institute, we could turn the place around. And that's what we did with some great partners, including my friend Norm Winarski. And when I left, we'd grown SRI 3.5 times. As Paul said, we probably became one of the most productive organizations in the world. I mean, how many places create another billion-dollar business every 3 or 4 years? With the same people, exactly the same people, we knew some people, but who were failing for 20 years just by changing the way they work. Now, here's the point. Innovation is about learning. It's about learning fast. So when I left SRI a couple of years ago, I joined 2 universities, Northeastern and WPI. And I was interested in 2 things. One of which is, why did our methodology seem to work so well? And most of the methodologies we tried failed. And I had a tip to get started, which we'll talk about here. At SRI, we did a lot of work on K through 12 education, and we were constantly evaluating programs that people were proposing from around the world. They almost all failed. It was very discouraging to see. We did the Khan Academy, for example, for the Gates Foundation, and the first results that came in were not good at all. It helped the top kids, but not the people we were after. So that was something. And then one day they come in with a program that shows really positive results. And I'm really interested in this. Why is this working? And they described to me that the students are working in little groups of 3. The teacher is a mentor. She's actually facilitating this whole process. The kids are learning from multiple points of view, stories, equations, simulations, all these different things. They use different kinds of tools. They use the computer for some things and paper and pencil for other things. And I asked them, well, what is this called? What are you doing? And they described to me this is called active learning, active learning. So that started my investigation. And we violate these principles in so many places. You know, to me, the civil rights issue of today in America is the fact that children of color, often in major cities, graduate their schools with no one who graduates with math skills. I mean, that is unbelievable in Baltimore and in Oakland and places like that. Well, you know, you look around, you go, we're violating some of these principles. So I just want to go quickly through what these principles are. You can think of this as the top 10 list of things that I learned that explain why that kind of music coaching works, why our innovation process works, and why when I see educational programs, they tend to work. The first one is engagement. Obviously, there's no learning if there isn't engagement. So when I was playing music, it was, you know, to play the masterpieces. If it's sports, it can be, you know, the kind of things that motivate achievement for those sorts of things. If it's Paul Warnish, you know, it's robotics who gets the kids involved, so they want to learn STEM. They got to be engaged. The second thing is continuously doing the task. You don't learn, you know, solid things that you can use by reading a book or going to a lecture. You have to do it and do it and do it and do it. Again, think of sports or music. You have to do it over and over again. The third thing is real-time feedback. You know, if you get feedback that's a year later, it's not going to do you much good. What you want to do is get the feedback as soon as the activity is done as you possibly can. The fourth thing is working in small teams with unique complementary skills. So what does that mean? Well, you want to work in teams whenever you can because your different teammates have different perspectives and they help you reframe the problem. They look at it in different ways and they help people think about it in different ways. And it's really, really powerful. It's one of the most powerful ways to learn. So you want a team that's big enough, so like 3 people at one end, so you get enough perspectives, but you don't want it to be too big because then you can't involve everybody. So 5 or 6, maybe 6 is the max that's effective, small teams. You want to have mentors and with peer feedback. So again, why a mentor? A mentor actually helps you solve the problems you have as opposed to a teacher who's just going through the recitation of a curriculum. You want to focus on the big ideas first. So what we do, everything you study that's serious, they're big ideas that are involved. And you want to focus on them first and then fill in the details as you go. So for example, in the algebra program we had developed, we focused on the big ideas of algebra, slope, proportionality, things, you know, the big ideas. And Because if the students don't get those big ideas, then the rest of it doesn't matter and they get lost. The next one is concise mental models and multiple representations. So again, what you want to do is you have to constantly reframe problems or knowledge so that different people can understand it quickly. So the models you use have to be comprehensible and concise. And so you use stories and equations and numerics and all these kinds of things to reach different kids or different adults. You want to leverage established knowledge. This one's kind of a big one, interesting one, because obviously there's knowledge in the world that you want to give to the kids or to whoever. But the way you want to do that is leverage the knowledge they already have. So you hook into them and then you add the new knowledge. So let's go to Paul Wanishiger. What is he doing by promoting robotics? Well, by doing that, the kids become interested in STEM activities. So he's leveraging their robotics interest into the STEM world. And guess what? He can then leverage the STEM stuff back into the robotics world. So you go back and forth, and that's pretty powerful if you can do it. Next is positive human values and motivating incentives, positive values. People don't work together if you don't treat them with respect. Respect is one of the most important things, make the biggest difference in America today, respect for others. And that's the foundation for collaboration, which is how you learn fast. And incentives come in many forms. They're not just money, obviously. It's mostly achievement and working together collaboratively, solving big important problems, a whole range of different things we can do. And the last one is one where we see a lot of the failure. It's integrating the solution into a complete system, pulling the pieces together in the way they complement each other. And when you do that, again, thinking of music or some sports teams or what Paul is doing, then it's pretty remarkable. So, for example, the Khan Academy wasn't very effective in the beginning because it wasn't tied closely enough to the classroom. So they weren't leveraging each other in the way that they needed to have the biggest impact. And they've made huge strides on that now, and it's very much more effective. And much to my surprise, once I learned these 10 principles, the analogy to music is almost perfect. The analogy to the value creation program that we teach, we taught at SRI, that transformed the place, is almost complete. And we're now teaching these things at WPI and Northeastern, and we're creating an online version of our program that'll be available in a couple more months because we want to scale these ideas at low cost. Now, the trick of putting them online, as you all know, is that online is not very effective. Back to the old model. You want to make it interactive and collaborative to be effective. And that's a harder thing to do, but we have a brilliant team at Northeastern, and we're doing that. So that's basically my story. My little 10 lists of top 10 active learning things. It's my template for how I think about the world. And it's just remarkably wonderful to be with Paul and the rest of both Pauls, to be here to see the kind of work that you folks are doing, because you are giving people a gift, one of the most important gifts in the world. And as you know, when you bring these ingredients together, it looks like magic. It's not magic. It's hard work doing the right things. So go.
Yeah, Curt, thanks for that. And you're right. It is hard work. So we've got questions coming in, and I baited the first one, and the audience does want to know. So I talked about your first Emmy, about high definition TV. Can you share just briefly how somebody wins a second Emmy and the technology that was involved there?
That one was for the broadcast of satellite video from satellites. So now a very important point here is, I'm a tiny piece of these awards. Again, those two awards exemplify the principles that I just announced. Brilliant people, collaborating like crazy, learning like crazy, great human values, all those things that are just, you don't win them. I mean, I suppose some people can, but we didn't know how to do that. We actually believed in the values that I just talked about, and it really worked for us.
Yeah. And that's great. One of the things that you've highlighted here, and you've had experience in industry, and one of the questions from the audience, because we have some industry folks in the audience, and they want to know, hey, do you have thoughts or ideas on how we can better leverage,
Yes,
industry and the professionals that are
yes.
out there to make K through 12, in this questioner's words, more interesting? Any
Well, yeah,
thoughts?
I do. And I think the really amazing thing just happened, which is kind of crazy, but the virus got all of us online. So it used to be that we had to get together, and that's really hard to do. You can't get industry folks, they're too busy. University folks are too busy. I'm too busy. But I now do workshops with high schools and colleges all over the world because I can go work with them for an hour. We can put something together. We can then work on a proposal. So I think the opportunity to leverage interesting projects and companies back, because we're going to solve the engagement problem. That's how it starts. And finding that, we're trying to do that in a profoundly different way at WPI. WPI is a project-based school. And now we can interact with industry in a profoundly different way. So here's the idea. What we're going to be doing is starting with a kind of a mini workshop on the kind of value creation stuff we talked about, help define a problem that's of interest to the students and to the companies. And now we have a language and we have a process to work together. And we think that's a home run. We think that we can now work all over the world. We could form a team with kids in India if we're doing potable water with kids in California or wherever. Couldn't do that before. So I think it's a really great question. I think we have a unique opportunity to make a huge difference here.
Yeah, and not all of these. So something for the audience, please, stay connected with us after this symposium here, and connect with Curt and connect with MITRE and other organizations to be able to do that. Because I'd love to hear more about, because we've all been in Zoom now for a year. A lot of us are tired of it. There isn't much engagement. How do you get to the students level and be engaged in an environment like this? And there are creative ways to do it for sure.
So, obviously you want to do a hybrid model because you want to, this is like one of those tools I mentioned about. You want to use this tool for what it's really great at, but then, use other tools that are appropriate. So I eventually want to get back to campus and meet the students, right?
Right. No, that's great. Let me, this was a great question. I thought, in the educational environment, there are STEM programs that sometimes just check the STEM box as opposed to being truly effective.
Yes.
So you talk a lot in the beginning about things that weren't working. This failed, this failed, this failed.
Yes.
Thoughts on measuring effectiveness of programs, because that measuring piece is really important.
Well, yeah, I actually, that's on my list. I forgot to measure assessment. That's one of those active learning principles. Thank you, Paul. By the way, I just posted them in the chat window, the 10 things I just listed. So yeah, it's not so easy. I would tell you though, if you do what we do, which is we have people with SRI, we all stood up every couple of weeks and we presented our value proposition. We gave people 5 minutes. Focus on the hard bits. Don't focus on the stuff, on the hard bits. And that kind of transparency, the negative side is it makes things that don't work really visible very fast. On the positive side, if people really they really want to solve the problem, it provides them the kind of insights and guidance and perspectives and feedback to really make a difference. It really does almost look like magic how fast progress can make if you put people into an active learning environment. I don't think people appreciate that. I know some of the people on this webcast do, but I think a lot of people don't realize how much their companies could be transformed by doing basic things, just having a shared language. So I ask everybody, I've talked with thousands of senior executives. I ask them, okay, write down on Post-it notes the definitions for innovation, value creation, customer value, and the value proposition, and put them on the wall. Not once has there been agreement. So this is like trying to play music without being able to read notes. It's crazy, Paul.
Right.
But it's not, the companies don't focus on this. They don't train their people to have these skills. But if they did just some basic stuff that we take from active learning that, you know, again, the people here, Paul and others on this webcast are doing, it's really powerful. I don't think people realize that.
Yeah. Let me, so we've got a question from the live audience now, and it comes in, and I'll read it. It says, love the idea of the importance of small teams and making those teams high-performing teams. What do you think about creating networks of teams like General McChrystal's team of teams and using technology to link just the right subject matter expert when needed? Thoughts on that?
Perfect. Brilliant question.
It's,
it's exactly the right question, because, and by the way, and it's accelerated because, again, now we can get people online. So at SRI, we tried to do that. We'd work on a project. If we didn't have a connection to somebody in the company who knew the answer, we'd go find that connection outside. It's all about learning. So if that's all you have to know is really, how can I learn faster than other people? Well, what you do is, if you don't know the answer, you go find the smartest person in the world and you bring them into your team. So it's not just networking, it's networking to find those pieces, those hard bits. Again, it's always the hard bits. You don't want to waste your time on stuff that doesn't matter. It's getting the answers to those hard bits so you can succeed fast. Brilliant question, absolutely right. And right, again, for the reason that we have everybody online now, there's a potential for a transformation for companies and universities who want to take advantage of it. 100%.
That's great. There's a related question. It says, how do we replicate these communities of practice? There needs to be a lot of them to be effective, but they're typically outside the accepted methods and therefore not typically supported as well.
Yeah, well, another great question. So first off, there's nothing stopping you and your team from learning these things and doing it. So I didn't tell this story, but at SRI, when we got started, the head of the vice president said to me, we don't think what you're doing has any value for the future of this company. You have no support from us. I had no money. I bought the pizza and the Coke, but we got together, we learned, we figured it out, and we took over the company. I think people don't realize the power and the potential they have, whatever their situation is, if they get the right skills and they work productively with respect with other people. I really think they do. They can.
One of the sets of folks in the audience are going to be our educators, those that are out there right now. And something I've learned in my short time here at the corridor is really the importance of the educators in that.
Yes.
Can you talk about, and believe, and my heart goes out to every one of them of what they do for our next generation. Can you talk about ideas on the way we can support educators better in using some of the principles and some things that you've seen to date?
Well, obviously, it's a really complicated thing. It goes throughout the entire system. And it's a little harder, obviously, if you're a teacher in an elementary school to do the kind of things I'm talking about, you know, forming a social group. Although that's exactly what happened at the KIPP schools. They got started because their schools were completely broken. And there was one genius African-American teacher who was just magic. This lady, I wish I could remember her name, but everybody should look her up. She was the genius teacher of genius teachers. And she was teaching using active learning principles. And the two guys who formed the KIPP program studied her, and they formed a little learning group, pretty much what I'm actually talking about here. And they decided that to really make a difference, they had to create a school system that scaled. And that's how they got started. So there's nothing that stops you, again, from learning and doing better. Although I'm very sympathetic to the problems. We've seen them every place we've gone. It's a tough thing.
Yeah, and I think, and this will lead into the panel here in a few minutes, which will be good because we've got some leaders in that world that can talk about that.
Yeah,
And I know,
I'm interested in what they're doing. Yeah. By the
yeah,
way,
no,
by the way, there's a new school called Minerva, which is really based on active learning. It's an online global university. They take the kids to 6 different countries for different semesters, and there are no lectures. It's all interactive. And I think they're pioneering a model that may really help us going forward in today's world. Again, leveraging the right technology for the right thing. And it's completely based on active learning to a degree I thought was impossible until I saw what they've done. And I've met their students. They are, to tell, they are awesome because they've learned critical thinking skills, they've learned collaboration skills, they've learned how to be problem solvers, they've gotten confidence, they've been engaged the entire time. That you cannot be unengaged at Minerva University. So I think, as a tip, there's a book on Amazon you can get called The Intentional University Minerva. I'd recommend anybody who's interested in active learning, that's a must-read book.
thanks for that. So there was some resonance about your comments about assessments.
Yes.
And the comment here is tests repeatedly fail as
Yes.
evidence of true understanding.
Yes.
Maybe we need to reassess the assessment process. Thoughts on that?
I do. I actually do, because part of our value creation methodology. So here's what we do. So we teach people how to identify important problems, not interesting ones. We give them a common language for the language to be able to communicate effectively about solving problems. And the third thing is we have what we call value creation forums, where we'd all stand up every couple of weeks and talk for 5 minutes. It's my masterclass analogy. And we would give feedback from multiple points of view for what was good, don't forget it, what could be improved, eyes of the customer, eyes of the funder, that kind of thing. All positive, all completely positive, no negatives at all, none, zero. The idea is about improvement. But there's a funny thing that happens when you set up a framework like that, is the assessment is actually built into it. You're getting, the feedback you're getting from your colleagues provides multiple forms of assessment in real time. You just talked for 5 minutes, and now you're getting some of the brightest people you know telling you whether you communicated the message or not. And I would tell you, after you've done that 3, 4, 5, or 6 times, it's transformative. I mean, you know this. You did this when you were a fighter pilot. We talked about how you got off the deck of when you landed your aircraft. The assessment guy walks up to you and says, "Paul,
here's your grade."
It's your grade. Well, so you can build those kind of things in if you do it very efficiently and very effectively, right? And here we're having the team learn by doing the assessment, because we're actually getting them to think about how to make their partner better, but they're also thinking about how they make themselves better.
Yeah.
That is a different game. That's
right.
That's not one way. You want these things to be two-way whenever you can make them that way.
Yeah, and that two-way piece, as you and I talked about last week, is just amazingly important. I've been given a 2-minute warning, and I want to give you all the time in the world for the 2 minutes. Here's the question, and then to end with any comments. And you mentioned it earlier in your presentation about lifelong learning. So, I sit here and I listen to you, and I go, I need these 10 principles to keep going so I can stay relevant in what we're doing in the corridor.
Yeah.
So your thoughts on the lifelong learning piece, and how would this apply not just through K through 12 and the university system, but for helping, because jobs are changing. I mean, there are jobs out there now haven't been invented yet that we're going to have, our younger generation is going to have to do. Thoughts on that?
Well, I never did anything I was trained in, so that proves the point. So that's why we're putting our program online, because we want to make it available to not only university, but primarily the first focus will be for companies to do that, and do it in a very lightweight, efficient way so they can do it.
Do you think the lifelong learning piece will, so you've talked about companies and that piece. What are other things that we can think about to be able to do that?
Let me put it this way. There's one skill that never becomes obsolete. It's the skill of being a value creator, someone who can solve problems in a way that has meaning for other people. Those people are the most valuable people in the world. So what we're trying to do at the universities, of course, is to set the students out with that kind of mindset.
Yeah.
Now, we're trying to do that with professionals as well. But I would say I wouldn't be working at my age if I hadn't learned how to be a value creator. That is to me the fundamental missing skill that we don't do enough with in America today.
Yeah, that's great. Curt, thank you very, very much. As I turn this over to Jim, this is a pleasure. And we did, for the audience, when Curt and I first talked, we spent the first 30 minutes talking about what it is to land on the aircraft carrier, which we've both done. And we talked about that feedback loop and things like that. So I will turn it now back over to my, and stay on if you can, because there'll be questions. And for the audience to engage with Curt, that's great. I'll turn it back over to my world famous helicopter friend, Jim Hurst. Back to you, Jim.
Okay, and I just want to thank you guys for what you're doing. And I told the Paul and Paul, I'm happy to come back and do a workshop if we can get some people to pull together who want to learn more about this. I'm happy to come back and we'll put together a session.
Absolutely, we'll do that. Thanks, Curt.